I'm Tammy Stamen with Caliber Home Loans. Thank you for joining me today for this presentation on remote online notarization. During the last legislative session, the OMBA's Legislative Committee worked extensively to help pass a new law that would allow for remote online notarization in the state of Oregon. The law did get passed in the first special session of 2020. However, we will need to work to pass the law again in the 2021 session because the current law will sunset, which is typical for regulation that gets passed during a special session. All of us in the mortgage business are familiar with the traditional notarization process where a notary and a signer meet face-to-face. We're also familiar with the in-person electronic notarization process where a notary and a signer meet face-to-face, but the documents are signed electronically. Remote online notarization happens when a notary and a signer are connected via video and audio technology. The documents get signed electronically and the notary seal also gets affixed to those documents electronically. Our OMBA member company, First American Title, is joining us today to share with us some of the risks and benefits that we should be aware of as we adopt this new technology.
Hi everyone, this is Tammy Stamen. I'm with Caliber Home Loans and also serve on the residential committee for Oregon Mortgage Bankers Association. And joining me today is Christina Brusco and Eddie Otto with First American Title. We are going to be chatting today with you about the remote online notary system. Obviously with, just everything that we've been dealing with this year with COVID and the fires and social distancing and all of those obstacles that we've been working within this year, there's been an increased demand for this remote online notary system. So we thought it might be beneficial to have Christina and Eddie from First American, who are experts in this area, talk to us a little bit about what some of the benefits and risks and just share with us some of the things that we should know about it. So Christina, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tammy. So I'm going to begin with just some of the benefits that we see for the customer primarily, but also for settlement agents and lenders. It provides a better consumer experience. The customer is able to view the documents ahead of time, so it's not last minute that they're seeing their documents. It helps us to find any corrections that need to be made, spelling miserrors, terms of the transaction, any errors there. So it really provides a higher quality process as well as a better customer experience. It also shortens the signing appointments. So our signing appointments we've seen gone from an hour down to 20 minutes. Sometimes that's the travel time between for the notary, for the real estate agent, for the mortgage broker or loan officer, as well as the customer. So it does cut that down quite a bit as well. So the other piece, which is a huge piece, is the security piece of it. So there's a couple ways that they identify somebody's identity. First is through KBA, which is knowledge-based authentication. That's where the system, the RON system, will ask the customer questions asking to verify their identity, similar to if you're applying for a loan or something like that, where you lived at this property address or whether you lived in this state. The signer has to get 4 out of 5 questions correct in order to move forward. The other piece for the identity is it does scan their ID and it's able to verify whether it is fake or whether it's authentic. So those two pieces combined are a stronger identity verification for the lender and for the settlement agent.
Cool. I didn't think about that piece from that benefit from a security standpoint, because I guess the contrary, people might have the contrary in their mind, so those are good points. So with all those benefits, obviously there are risks and things that we should be aware of. So Eddie, what can you share with us there?
Yeah, most certainly, Tammy. There are a number of risks that the industry has been working to mitigate and that vendors are working to mitigate, but just a few of the areas of risk that we look at, from an underwriter perspective, but otherwise just any professional in the industry with some experience. The first is around fraud. And early on, when when people in our industry would hear about this possibility of doing some sort of a closing and notarization over a webcam, the visceral reaction is absolutely not. That's a terrible idea, because they worried about fraud. So yes, I think this RON environment that is maturing and growing and evolving has the potential to either amplify the risk of fraud or actually reduce the risk of fraud. So if the controls that Christina were just going over are not in place, then you certainly open up the door to have a lot more fraud out there. But as you implement knowledge-based authentication and ID verification and other controls like that, it's actually can in many ways be a much better process than the in-person notary where you hold up an ID and look at it for 5 seconds and hope it's not a fake, right? So, so fraud is a big concern, but you know, as we stated, with process, with awareness, and with technology, actually fraud could be reduced. In addition, you're recording the event, so fraudsters don't typically like to be recorded in the act of their whatever their crime is, so that might be another deterrent as well. Another risk is recording acceptance. So there's always a concern that the security instruments and other important recorded documents that are being insured in the transaction, that they serve as accurate and appropriate and legal constructive notice in whatever the jurisdiction is. And a lot of times documents can get recorded with a county, but they don't follow the rules of the county or of the state or of some other regulation. And later in a foreclosure, bankruptcy, or other type of hearing, it's possible, depending on the county and the state, it's possible to have a document that was recorded get conceptually unrecorded, and now you might not have an enforceable lien. You might lose priority in a bankruptcy or a foreclosure hearing or procedure. So recording acceptance is really important. I think in Oregon, the law and the regulations done a pretty good job at providing clarity around that, and I think we might get into some of those details a little bit later. But that is another concern and risk with RON in general is, will the county recorder accept a document that's never been printed and never been ink signed and looks like somebody just typed a name on it and say that's okay to record, that's valid? So that's one of the other risks out there that again can be overcome with knowledge and with clear rules. Tammy, were you going to ask a question?
Yeah, so you're saying that's all determined by county then, as far as the acceptance?
Typically, yes. Now, I believe in Oregon, in the regulation and in the law, they basically all of the counties must accept. Christina, you might have to help me out because I'm not the local here, but they must accept RON signed, documents signed in this manner, given that they follow certain procedures, put the right disclosures and disclaimers on there, etc. And even if you can't e-record in an Oregon county, there is a provision where you can print the e-signed digital documents. Now you have a piece of paper, and then likely the procedure is something around an attached certification that is also notarized, probably, Christina?
Correct, yes.
Also notarized, probably not with the same notary, but notarized that somebody else is attesting that this thing I just printed is an accurate copy of the digital version that was executed on a platform. And many other states are using that same provision, and we call that papering out in e-close circles in our industry. So this papering out provision sort of opens the door and reduces that risk quite a bit. That doesn't mean you bring one of those in one day to one county, maybe sometimes it's a rural county, and they look at it and say, what the heck is this? Nobody signed it, and throw it out the window. That could always happen. But the big concern is something that gets recorded that's not done appropriately and later is determined not to serve that constructive notice. That's where the risk lies. So I think Oregon did a really good job with their regulations and the law to cover that risk. Does that answer your question, Tammy?
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe more than you wanted.
Oh,
So the last risk is really around legality, and this is going to be an interesting one to just sort of watch from the wings for a number of years. There's all sorts of different flavors of RON and e-closing and RIN and all these different things that have been happening. Certainly with the pandemic, people get a little too creative sometimes. We haven't really seen any of these documents, as far as what's notarized, recorded, really be challenged in court. And you can bet your bottom dollar, if one mortgage is overturned and one consumer is basically forgiven for having to pay that, at least according to county record and lien on a property, that there are going to be a bunch of class action attorneys that try and find everybody who's signed a document this way. So that's one of the other big concerns in the industry, is let's make sure it's legal, make sure you follow the letter, of the law to a T and the regulations, and just make sure you stay in compliance of if the county has any specifics or if the state has any specifics. So that's just what us worry warts at the underwriters always think about is, well, what if something happens in 1 or 5 or 30 years? Well, if it's 30 years, I might not care about it, but somebody might care about it who's much younger than I am. So we're always keeping our eye on that. So that's the other risk, is just the legality of it. Make sure there's a good law, there's a good guidance and regulation, and make sure if you're in charge of doing the RON notarization that you're following all those steps.
Makes sense. So, I mean, there's several different arms of the industry, whether it's lenders or just other settlement service providers. If somebody wants more information about how to, initiate this process within their own organization or business, what recommendations do you have as far as that?
So I will speak to lenders. The biggest piece for lenders is the e-note. So since everything is electronically signed, it's videoed it's recorded, the RON session. They have to have an e-vault to be able to store these electronic notes. Otherwise, that's the biggest hurdle that people have had to overcome, just because it's an investment in technology and having a place to store those electronic notes. The investor also has to be able to purchase that and be willing to accept an electronically signed note rather than an ink signed note. So those are probably two of the biggest pieces for a lender. The other piece for lenders is also getting your settlement agents on board. There's so many different platforms for RON, and getting your settlement agents on board, getting familiar with the actual platform itself, and so that you can be proficient in that. And the last I would say towards lenders is have somebody that is an expert on those, on the whole process, so that you have somebody to explain the process, to also push people towards using it versus doing it the way that we've always done it. So those would be the biggest pieces that I would say for a lender to be aware of as far as moving forward with the RON process.
Makes sense. Probably just like have that subject matter expert in the organization.
Exactly.
From start to finish. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I would add to that, Tammy. I mean, I think that's the perfect advice for lenders, and it's similar, a little bit different, but some similarities as far as advice for settlement providers out there, knowing that RONs may be coming at them because a lender wants to initiate it. But you also have to think about settlement agents need to think about their opportunities of initiating RONs on their own. So, so one piece of advice just goes back to some of our risks. It's really, understand the legalities and understand the rules and regulations in the state, obviously in the county where the property is located. You might have to check with certain counties if there are any limitations or not. And I'm not sure what those would be across the state, but you really should have an expert that's digging into that and understand that. Then back to recording capability. It doesn't hurt to check in at least before your first one, or the local counties around you, just to check in with a phone call, or if you've got someone going to the clerks and the courthouses to ask, are you guys going to have any problems accepting remote online notarization documents? And if nobody there knows what you're talking about, you might need to dig a little further and just make sure your local market's ready to roll. You don't want to have to be dealing with that on a closing day with a signing, trying to get something recorded, and then you get stuck. So low likelihood, but if it does happen, it's kind of a severe pain for that transaction and for the people involved, especially with the volumes I would imagine everybody's experiencing these days with the refis.
Yeah.
Make sure that for settlement agents, make sure you check in with your underwriter's guidelines on transactions. So beyond the county and the state, the legalities and the regulations and the recording rules, you need to talk to your underwriters about, are there any types of transactions that we can't do Ron on? Some might have limitations with commercial transactions. Some might have limitations on what the liability can be. Maybe it's $1 million or $2 million or some threshold above which they will not insure. Unfortunately, at this point, those requirements and those limitations are not common across all of the underwriters. So as a settlement agent, as a title agent, you should check in and understand what each underwriter allows when you're talking about property types, when you're talking about types of transactions and the liability amounts. Another thing for a settlement agent is, and this goes for everything, for forever backwards and forwards, is make sure you double and triple check the lender's closing instructions. It's possible, even if a lender is advising you to do a remote online notarization, or they are setting up a remote online notarization, it's possible their lender's instructions dictate something about original documents, or ink sign or wet sign, or something that might really pose a contrarian view to what they're asking you to do, which is a RON. So help your lenders out, look at those closing instructions and think in terms of, no documents will be printed. Is there anything in here that dictates something that I cannot do because I'm not printing anything? Like, you have to mail your documents to this address. Well, how do you do that when none of them are paper? So help your lenders out, look at their closing instructions, and make sure you're not putting yourself in violation of those instructions. Probably a low risk, since it's their instructions anyway, if they're asking you to do a RON, but it's worth checking and worth talking to them about. I also think it's important for settlement providers, putting loans aside, for all of your seller deals, for all of your cash deals, there is no loan to deal with, and there is no lender that might have an opinion one way or the other. So this opens the door for rethinking about what is your geographic coverage on doing signings if you don't have to come into an office for sellers or for cash buyers, etc. It really opens the door to a lot of opportunities. So settlement agents should look at choosing a RON platform and exercising their ability to do some RON closings where there's no loan, and that's those seller side and cash deals. And lastly, exactly what Christina said about lenders is to create an expert in your company. No matter how big or small your company is, everybody should know who's the smartest person in the room on e-closing and RON and all these details, and equip that person to go to conferences, now virtual conferences, to read, to carve out some of their day so that they can be the smartest person in the room, and really be the internal advisor on which platform should we use, how do we deal with these transactions, how do we sell our service to realtors and our capabilities to lenders out there. Tammy, I could keep going. You want to talk about regulators?
I think we probably should touch on that a little bit, yeah.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. I know we're trying to keep this a little bit short, but you can tell I'm a little bit passionate about it. So for state regulators, I think Oregon's done a pretty good job, but just as far as advice out there, it's all about clarity. We've seen at First American, and having been very involved with many states' legislative process, we've seen a lot of not great laws and not great regulations put forth. Some that are they contradict themselves, or some just don't provide enough clarity where it leaves things too open-ended and people get stuck and adoption doesn't move. So that mantra of clarity dissolves resistance is always very good. to implement. So native digital documents that are never going to be, that are meant to never be printed, how do you handle those in a county that doesn't do e-recording yet? Oregon took care of that with their papering out provision. But that's a nit-nat detail that some other states do not have at this point, and it creates a lot of confusion. The process to become an electronic notary versus a RON notary, are they the same? Are they different? Or do the notaries that already have their certificates, credentials, and their assignments, are they automatically a RON notary as soon as the law is enabled? So there's a lot of details that states and regulators, the lawmakers, need to think about to make sure they're providing great clarity to the notary and a path to becoming a RON and doing actual transactions, information for lenders, clarity for insurers and everybody else involved, attorneys alike. So that clarity on all those details, if I were a regulator, I would go and look at all the other states and what they've done and try and create, you know, the best of breed of all of those things. And that'd be my advice to them as well.
Yeah, they have their hands full for sure. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Wow, that was great. You guys, I mean, it covered way more than I anticipated. So that's really good information. I appreciate it. Christina, I'm curious, how many transactions are you seeing come across your desk that are wrong?
I'm seeing quite a few. Primarily right now, it's been sellers. We've had a lot of sellers stuck in other countries or in other states due to COVID and the embassies are closed, the apostille process they're not able to use. So it's been very, that's primarily the way we've been using it. Lenders are so across the board with their underwriters. We've had some lenders that will allow a power of attorney to be signed via RON, and then somebody wet signed the entire loan package. We have a handful of lenders that are ready to go here in Oregon for a full RON signing. I did have one small credit union, and to speak to Eddie's point that he was talking about educating everybody in the process, that they're just a local credit union, didn't know they authorized the RON because somebody was high risk for COVID, and they had no idea what the process was. They didn't know they weren't going to have, you know, like a paper note. They didn't even know the word e-vault. So that's where, I mean, asking the questions and knowing what to ask is so important. But we have only had a handful of loan packages being signed via RON, just because lenders aren't ready at this point. But I've been surprised just in my role and seeing how it's progressed. I thought it would be several months, 6 months to a year before we would see it, and it was almost immediate after the law passed that there were a couple lenders that were already set up in other states that, you know, brought Oregon into the picture for their RON signings.
A lot of things happening this year that we thought we
Yes.
would see.
That's the truth, yes.
All right, well, I think that we can wrap up unless you guys have anything else you want to add.
I could go on for days, but I won't, Tammy.
Thank you for having us, Tammy.
Absolutely. Thank you both very much for your time. We appreciate it. And have a good rest of the day.